an absolute pleasure and privilege to be having this conversation with Shaheena Janjuha-Jivraj with me here. And it's my honor to do her introduction here. Like they say, long introduction alert. Uh, so I'm just doing that heads up for you. There's a lot that can be said about Shaheena. She's an associate professor in entrepreneurial leadership and diversity at HEC Paris in Qatar. Shaheena is also an expert in DEI, women's leadership and innovation. She works with public organizations, NGOs, and private business leaders globally, including FTSE 100 and Fortune 500, to help them transform their cultures and strengthen workplace cultures. She's worked on gender leadership policy for the UK government and EU, participated in the Chatham House Gender Program. And here's something interesting, between 2015 to 2018, she produced benchmarking reports on women in leadership across 52 countries. That's right. Leading to leadership policy reports for Commonwealth heads of government meetings. Shaheena also holds a PhD in family business management from UK's Brunei Business School, and she's attended education programs at Harvard Business Review and Manchester Business School. Shaheena is also on the advisory board for Qatar Women's Engineering Association and chair of the Women's Council for the French Chamber of Commerce in Qatar. She's an academic director for women and leadership programs at HEC Paris, with just under 200 women attending programs in the last 2 years. Shaheena has written 4 books on leadership, and I think there's a 5th book also ready for release, or it's just been released. Is that right, Shaheena?
No, 4th book has just been published. 5th and 6th books are in my
the
head.
mind. So she's written 4 books on leadership, including Succession and Family Business, and her most recent one, which is about how women leaders are driving success through innovation. She's a regular Forbes contributor for the last 6 years, and recently she was celebrated as an icon for trailblazing women in 2024 by INC Media. Phew, that was long. Did I miss anything, Shaheena?
No, thank you, Rajesh. You did that beautifully. Thank you.
So, entrepreneur, academician, author, there's so much more that we have to talk about today, various facets of your journey. But what I was very curious to start with is to ask you this question, these 2 words that I came across reading about you, which said you describe yourself, Shaheena, as a disruptive academic. Tell us about these 2 things. What does disruptive academic mean?
Thank you, Rajesh. Well, it's, first of all, can I say it's such a pleasure to be on the panel with you this morning. Such an honor to be with you, and also really excited to be speaking to everybody this morning and part of the You Accelerate event. It's an absolute privilege, and I do say this morning because I know you're well into the afternoon. I'm in Paris, so it's still quite early for me. Disruptive academic. Well, I started my journey at university, and I come from a family business background. And when I fell in love with a subject while I was doing my degree, which was entrepreneurship, I sat in the classroom understanding that the way the professors were teaching entrepreneurship was completely different to my lived reality at home. It was very sanitized, it was very logical, it was very ordered, it was very structured. Anyone who's had any involvement with the family business knows it's completely the opposite, completely the opposite. And when I decided to go into academia, which was at a very young age, I wanted to bring that chaos and that reality into thinking, because it's very easy in a classroom to talk in a very sanitized way around this is what the process is in an organization. This is what leadership looks like. But we all live in that very messy area between what theory says and what reality is. And so I created a path for myself that allows me to spend as much time outside of the classroom as inside. So over the last 25 years of my career, I have been a full-time academic. I have been a very part-time academic. I have run my own business. And even today, I have a balance between teaching in the classroom, but then also bringing knowledge into the business world, into offices, into organizations, working with individuals, working with leaders, and then taking that learning back into the classroom and back and forth. So that's one facet of it. And then there are so many other elements, which if we get time to explore, but even really, I think for me, the core is really challenging what the notion of education is and what we're using it for, and making it very applied. So the moment you walk out of a classroom, if you know we're in a training program, we've done something, I will keep reminding participants, this is what you take away and implement as soon as you're back in. And I say it's disruptive because a lot of what I teach is about innovation and change. So you have to be very willing to change things and disrupt the way we think about things and create space for that.
Yeah, thank you, and that's absolutely the need of the hour, if I may say, because we live in a disruptive world.
Yes,
The world outside is disrupted, getting disrupted literally every second, and academia, therefore, being hand in hand with what is happening outside, is absolutely fantastic in that sense. Um,
absolutely. And I think, you know, to your point, we we know this, we're living it, you've said it. I mean, there are new challenges that come up every day. The level of disruption we are facing right now as leaders, working with leaders, it is unprecedented. And so it becomes incredibly important to ensure that any sort of training, whether it's formalized in a classroom, whether it's exec ed, whether it's through coaching, whether it's whatever it is, helping individuals to be better prepared for change. It's very easy to take a textbook and say, here's a model of change, here's a model of innovation, here's a model for leadership. But of course, it doesn't work that way because we are all individuals. We all have that level of uncertainty in what we do. You know, how you woke up this morning will be different perhaps to how you wake up next week or how you woke up yesterday. The other factors going on. So understanding that the models are there to provide a way to think, to provide that critical thinking around making sense of generalized behaviors, making sense of operations, what's going on, that these things are incredibly important, but still being able to flex. And I think we're moving into a model of leadership right now where flexibility, versatility, something I know we'll be talking about, it's absolutely critical. And at the same time, it's a really big tension because in essence, we like the idea of change, but we don't like it when change is forced on us unless we are emotionally, mentally prepared for this and understand what that looks like for us. So again, all of these elements, when you think about what that means, when you're talking about training, education, learning, it's building that curiosity, the willingness to try things differently and perhaps get out of a mindset that we may well have gone through, especially through formal education.
That's right. And just before we proceed, one ground rule is that, I mean, housekeeping rule is just put in your questions on the chat box, and Shaheena will address them as we go along. We also have some time at the end for Q&A, so we can take some of the generic questions a little later. But if there's any here and now question, I'll pass them on to Shaheena, who will address it there and then. Um, Shaheena, the other thing that I read is this whole framework that you have about literally like a triangle of diversity, leadership, and innovation.
Mm.
Talk us through this framework and why is it so important?
Sure. Okay. So, Rajesh, I've been working in the field of diversity for about 15 years. Now, prior to that, I'd set up 2 entrepreneurship centers within business schools in the UK. And one of the things I did, which was really groundbreaking for the UK, the entrepreneurship program we offered was for undergrads and postgrads, but across the whole university.
Wow.
And what I noticed in that classroom, we would have 100 students. So final year students, master students, and even first year PhD students. And again, what I wanted to do was replicate the workplace as much as I could for students to learn how to develop the necessary soft skills to work. But what I noticed in that time, and I'm talking about 16 years ago, the quality of the business ideas was so much better than just having a room full of business study students. And that's when I really started to understand this idea about diversity feeding into better quality thinking. I mean, we're here today where we all recognize the value that diversity is linked to better quality thinking. It's a good thing to have for the business, but 16 years ago, this wasn't quite where the thinking was. And that was the journey I went on to say, okay, if we want to get better quality thinking in a classroom, within a team, within an organization, then we need to have more diverse people around the table. We need more diversity around the table. That's where I started doing a lot of the work in this space. Now, we know there are multiple facets of diversity. And probably for the first 5 years, most of the companies I was working with, we spent a lot of time trying to work out, are we looking at gender? Are we looking at race? Are we looking at age? All of these things kept coming up. I think these are still really important issues, and we still need, that's the starting point. But what is really interesting about this work now is where we get to the point where you can say, okay, we want to get the best quality thinking out of diverse teams, that cognitive diversity. You want to bring the best experiences. You want to bring out their perspectives, how that helps to shape different ways of thinking. So a lot of work has been done with organizations across the world, building diverse teams. That goes without saying. We know that there's a strong correlation between diversity and revenue-based innovation. Okay, that's the connection, and that's really important because we are talking about businesses and we're talking about improving business performance. The piece that's missing here is about leadership. You have a diverse team sitting around a table. That magic, that quality of innovative thinking is not just going to happen. The leader needs to create the culture where the team feels safe to come up with new ways of thinking, safe to come up with creative ideas, safe to come up with ideas that frankly can seem a little bit crazy. And that's where the leader, the culture, the tone they set, their behavior becomes absolutely critical. And that's where a lot of my work is now happening. So when I explain to people what I do, and when I give them the triangle, it starts to make sense to them, because there's been a sense for a while in organizations that, well, we've built the diverse teams, the magic should happen. We're not getting the results. But you have to do something to squeeze the value out of that. And that's about shifting the leadership culture. And I always start with the end point, which is better quality thinking, innovation. That's the end goal. Let's move backwards. And this is what you need to do. So once you work in that framework, it then becomes easier to see, okay, this is why we're doing it. This is what we need. And Rajesh, and I mean, we can explore this a bit more. I think this also then leads into things like, why is this important right now when we think about the future trends of leadership? Because this is not just a diversity agenda. This actually is much bigger.
Yeah. This reminds me of, there was a nice video that was shared recently, which had Simon Sinek talking to Trevor Noah. And this was on a completely different subject about friendship. I don't know whether you saw that. There's a very rich conversation about the role of friendship in a world that is getting increasingly isolated thanks to technology. Why I bring this up here is because the conversation moved from leadership to Simon mentioning about how women are naturally good at that. They have an affinity for bonding. They have high levels of empathy. At which point, Trevor Noah asked him about leadership, and he said, "I am 110% convinced that women make better CEOs." That was Simon Sinek speaking, and because they have a better understanding of the dynamic, the human dynamic. How do you sort of look at the role of women when it comes to innovation and leadership?
Sure. Okay. So it's a really, really great question. And I was smiling because I keep being asked this question a lot at the moment. When we think about connections and building relationships, the fundamental piece of that is about trust. I trust you, you trust me. I trust that you will give me the space I need to work, beyond every, whatever. I mean, we talk about formalized contracts at work. We know psychological safety is a huge topic at the moment, and it's not black and white, right? There are so many shades of gray in there in terms of what psychological safety looks like, what it means, how you have to keep reinforcing it, and ensuring that that trust is felt in the space. And what I've just said about building creativity, you can only truly be creative where you feel safe. You know, if you feel that your ideas will be dismissed, you will completely shut down. And we know, for example, that when you are, if somebody excludes you, whether it's a child at school, whether it's somebody in the workplace, that feeling of exclusion triggers the same sense of pain as if you were physically hurt. Okay, so we do everything we can not to be excluded. So I say that because when we then talk about building friendships, and building trust, we have to. Friendships hugely important, of course they are. Sometimes I do. I'm a big fan of, you know, going in, and I used to be this big fan of going in and building friendships at work, and then over time began to also understand, you know, you need to build trust, but you also need to hold the barriers there, and that's a really important thing. So I think the language we use around that we need to be careful with. The point about gender and empathy, though, is really interesting because empathy is so critical in terms of building trust. I would argue it's actually one of the leadership superpowers we need today. But and here's my very big sort of caveat with this: we have to be extremely careful that we don't make this a responsibility for women.
Mm.
Because then it becomes another thing that women have to do at work. There's a lot of research that talks about the unpaid or the undervalued responsibilities of women at work. You know, sort of doing the housekeeping at work, making sure that things sit well. That it's sort of that it's seen as very sort of gendered norms that women sort of keep the groups together. But actually, this has to be everyone's responsibility, because even for any leader to build a trust with their team, to get to that point of innovation, empathy needs to be there, and you can teach it. So when you start looking at how you break down, when I teach, for example, innovative thinking, coming at it from design thinking, one of the key elements I get participants to work on is empathy mapping, and literally putting themselves in the shoes of somebody else to understand what's going on, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and they get those aha moments. So it is absolutely critical that we recognize the importance of empathy, and at the same time recognize it should be across the board for everyone, not just for women. And to your point about women being better leaders, if I can just share a piece of research, during COVID, we had first 6 months, clearly nobody knew what was going on in the world. Really difficult to make sense of what was going on with this virus. And, we can all remember that we all expected by September things would get back to normal.
Yeah.
We thought summer would happen and then that would be it. There is some research that has come out, and I talked about this in a previous Forbes article about this. The countries that performed better in terms of death rates and recovery rates for people who had COVID, those countries were run by women leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So when you compared them, when they were compared to countries of a similar size, so stats, they were all fairly similar to other countries in that group. The countries that performed better were run by women, and the traits the women had included, in the face of absolute uncertainty, volatility, they were much, much more collaborative. They listened more, and they built on expertise around them, and used that to provide the policies to support the country, rather than not listening to the advice that was ongoing in a very, very volatile situation.
Yeah, that's and this reminds me, Shahina, about this lovely little visual that I saw on your LinkedIn profile, which really resonated with me and stuck in my head, which you said about platforms, not pedestals. Women need platforms. They don't need pedestals. Um,
Yeah.
just and we can relate to it because we had our Vinesh Fogart from India, who, if you remember the story about, she just missed the Olympic medal by a whisker, but there was so
Yes.
much history behind that about and she's gone through this whole thing about being platforms and pedestals. So I was just sort of drew the correlation between the two.
Yeah. I mean, look, through the diversity work, I've been working in the women's space for about 15 years. I mean, even my PhD, unwittingly, I ended up looking at the role of women in family businesses. And I think what really hit me, and it was very much when I did the Commonwealth research, um, it is very easy to put a couple of women on a pedestal and say, here's what success looks like. These are our phenomenal women who are role models. And yes, absolutely, absolute kudos. And we all know the sacrifice and struggle that women have gone through in order to get into those positions and those roles. The thing is, today we need to have much more diversity of leadership. The models of leadership we have, even the models of leadership we teach in business schools, they work up to a point, but we need a lot more diversity, especially when we're working in a very multicultural and multidimensional environment. We need very different role models. And actually, more and more, when you speak to people about their role models, it's usually not one or two people. It's
Yeah,
composite role modeling, right?
that's right.
It will be family members, it will be teachers, it will be friends, it will be aspirational celebrity figures, but it's composite. You bring bits of different people together to say, this is what inspires me. And that's why we need a lot more diversity. We need many different role models out there. It's not enough to say we've got one and done. We've got the first woman in space, we've got the first woman in CFO or CEO of this bank or that, or whatever. We need enough diversity so it normalizes. And again, we have to remember, and we're sort of talking around this, but in the extreme level of volatility we're facing and the uncertainty in organizations and in the world, there isn't one model of leadership that works. There are traits of leadership. So we also need to see that not just with men, but also with women. So that's my first point. My second point is also, when you have this platform, it's actually much harder to dismantle.
Yeah.
Put a pedestal, it's very easy to knock it down. When the tide changes or the view is slightly different, it's very easy to knock that pedestal. Once that person goes, it's very easy to be replaced by a man. And then the argument is, well, we tried this, it didn't work, you see. And again, sometimes, well, not sometimes, more often than not, we hold women up to a higher standard and expect much more. And then when it doesn't work, we say, well, we told you it didn't work. We have to remember every leader is still a human being and they will make mistakes. And if they're not making mistakes, then I would argue, are they trying hard enough?
Yeah.
That's my philosophy with this. So having a pedestal means people can come up, they're there, they can come down, they make it, for whatever reason they come down, but there's enough coming through. So pedestals are much harder to dismantle. And of course, it also really enforces the need that once you're up there, your responsibility is to keep pulling up others up with you.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's lovely. There's lots of questions coming up, and lots of intense questions. So maybe we'll have to just pick and choose some, and some we will leave for the later. Let's pick up the conversation on women, since we are talking about it right now.
Sure.
Harsh Tukral is saying, I don't know if it's also a scenario sometimes that women can be more critical or stern uh, with other women too, and the compassion element between men for women and women for women may be further studied. I wonder if it makes sense on this one.
Yeah, yeah, so women can be more critical and so. Okay, so I think, Harsh, it's a really great question, and it's something that comes up so many times. And I often have women saying, I had a woman, she was a terrible boss. I would never have a female boss again. And I think it's about stepping back and looking at the bigger situation. There's a long answer, but I'm going to give a short answer here, and then more than happy to carry on the conversation. It comes back to what I just said. Most of our models of leadership have been drawn from, in business schools, they've been drawn from Western Europe, North America, post-Second World War, and most of the research was done on middle-class men. Okay, that's it. So the models of leadership we have worked in a certain genre for a certain type of person. And for the longest time, it also meant that as women were coming through the organization, they would use these models and work through them and apply them. There are very mixed messages that are sent to women. So on one hand, you have women who are falling into this model of leadership because that's what's been taught, right? So that's the model I need in order to be seen as an effective leader. I will do it. Research has shown that there are such immense double standards between men and women. So where a man is seen as assertive, a woman will be seen as aggressive. Where a man is seen as determined, a woman will be seen as stubborn, difficult. And this research, it came up about 10 years ago, and it still shocks people when you talk about it or when I share it with participants, and they say, yes, that's still the reality. And, we can start unpacking this, because we're then talking about biases, we're talking about cultural norms, we're talking about both within the organization, what the norms are, and also across society. This is why, in order to shift this, it's better to come at this through the lens of innovation, because if you look at the characteristics and the behaviors you need to be really innovative and creative, it's much, much more dynamic and fluid. And it builds on the strengths that actually women have really well, which is about building collaboration, building flexibility, building trust, being willing to say, I'm not sure, I don't know about things, but we can problem solve this together. And this is where I am excited, because I think we're seeing new models of leadership. And this is, again, I think, it's complicated, because also I think, when somebody has an experience with a bad boss, they remember it. And then when it's gendered, because if they're in the minority, people remember that even more, that she was bad as a female boss. So therefore, all female bosses are bad.
Yeah.
And so having more
Yeah.
bosses normalizes this, female bosses normalizes that not every female boss is going to be terrible. I mean, it's complicated, so I'm giving a very short answer to a very
I just read a comment here, and not so much as a question, but Ritu seems to communicate exactly the same thing that you spoke about. Women leaders often face entrenched stereotypes about their capabilities or leadership styles. Many may be unfairly seen as less decisive or authoritative, which can undermine their leadership potential. Precisely the point you made about assertive, aggressive,
And actually, Ritu, thanks for that. It was something. So in the last book we wrote, one of the things that bothers me a lot, there's a lot of language that we use around women, and I wanted to go away and challenge the stereotypes, or just challenge the assumptions behind this language. So, for example, very quickly, there was, sometimes there's a view that women are seen as being very controlling. They're not very good at delegating. And I went away to find the research. I mean, this is the academic in me. I wanted to go and find the research to understand where this sat. And the research around women controlling their teams, it's 20 years old. So we're talking about research from 20 years ago that talked about women controlling their teams. The landscape in organizations 20 years ago was so different. And the reason why they control their teams was actually, it came down to the teams not trusting them. And if your team doesn't trust you, what do? You hold on tighter to your team. Right. So this is one of the things in the book I did. I went through, my job was to go through the research and actually say, okay, let's challenge some of the assumptions here. We talk about imposter syndrome. That's also a big one that really is ready for challenging right now. But even team handling, team management, the data is old, but the problem is people stick to these things because, as you said, Rita, it's the stereotypes and biases that kick in.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so much more that we need to delve into, but I'll just probably take one question on. I think you've touched a nerve on the aspect of men versus women. This was bound to come in as part of our conversation. There's a comment from Sandeep Kalra, Shaheen, which says that the trust part still takes longer within Indian context. How is it in the Western world? In reference to what you just mentioned about what things 20 years before.
Sandeep, it's a great question. I mean, I think trust is very culturally specific. You start to unpack it, and again, we'll do a very quick answer on this. Culturally specific. I work both a lot in Europe and North America, but I also work a lot in the Middle East. And actually, what I do see, the traits that are similar, and I think I would argue this also extends to India as well and parts of Asia. It's about hierarchy, right? There's a lot about hierarchy and about structures of authority. Look, why do people struggle with trust? And the biggest problem here is, if I trust you, I want to set you up to succeed. People don't like to fail. Okay, people are terrified of failing because failure, the consequences can be huge. To be given permission to fail is absolutely critical. And we understand it. If I'm talking to you, if we were doing a whole session on innovation, conceptually, you would absolutely be agreeing with me. Yes, to be creative, you need space to fail. Not big stuff, small stuff, but you need to have permission to fail and to learn from it. Amazing leaders are there and others are not there yet. And this is across the board, right? It's not, I do programs in America, and I have seen even there people saying, yes, we understand the principles of this, but my manager will still not let me trip up. I can't afford to. So it's more about the mindset around where can I create space to learn, and the best learning comes from when we make mistakes. Let's not talk about failure, but and there's some really interesting work coming through about the learning organization, learning mindset for leaders. Growth mindset is huge. I'm a big fan. It's a big part of the coaching world as well. The work on growth mindset is absolutely huge because it completely feeds into innovation. But trust only comes when you actually say to that person and demonstrate to that person that it's okay for them to make mistakes. You are there. You're not going to let them completely mess up everything, but it's okay for them to learn from their mistakes, because that's where the best learning comes from. And we know that's where the best innovation comes from. But Sandeep, again, more than happy to carry on that conversation with you because it's huge.
Let's move on to your book, Future Proof Your Career. And talk a little bit about how do you see future trends shaping up in leadership, and what does really one need to do, men or women, to future-proof their career? There's so much talk about AI and so much talk about job uncertainty, in addition to the disruption around. How do you see the future panning out?
Sure. So I think Rajesh, we've talked about this sort of roundabout. So I'm glad you're asking me, because I can go into the three big areas. Uncertainty or complexity, it's here with us. Every generation says it. We have more wars than any other point in history. Geopolitics is really tough. Climate crisis is real. It's all of these things are there. The advance of tech, understanding how we are working with tech. And I heard a great I was listening to a fantastic podcast yesterday, which said rather than talking about AI, we should talk about IA in terms of intelligence augmentation, how we are using tech to improve our thinking. Right, it's a real mind shift in terms of how we think about things. So globally, what's going on geopolitically, what's going on technology, all of these things are really impacting us. We have to, as leaders working in organizations, it is important to find new solutions. What we've done before doesn't get us to where we need to get to in the future. So new ways of thinking, new solutions, absolutely critical. So if we see that, then as an individual, what do we need to do? As individuals working as coaches with colleagues, clients, what do we need to be thinking about? The big thing for me is versatility. And versatility is, to me, what I see as sort of these new meta aspects of leadership. So we've talked about some of these in the conversation. A lot of people move into leadership spaces because technically they're very good at what they do, and they get promoted and they move up and so on and so forth. And then the people skills sort of wrap around it, so you become a good team leader. The meta skills are really these things we're talking about in terms of, okay, how do I create the conditions for creativity? How do I create the conditions to be agile? And I mean agile in terms of versatility, not in terms of technical capabilities. Literally, the example I use with individuals, it's, you have to know your team well. You have to understand the details. You need to know them so they feel valued and they feel trusted, but also being able to literally step back and take the balcony view of what's going on within your division, your department. More and more, I'm being asked to work with companies to build innovation and to build collaboration, to de-silo their leaders. You can only do that when you step back and you start to see connections across the organization. And so being able to zoom in and zoom out, a bit like what we do with our phones and our cameras, having that skill, that versatility is absolutely crucial. And so I think then when you start to look at that, you have to know, yes, your skills really well. You have to understand your people really well. And you also have to build a practice of literally taking the balcony view. And to do these things, which is hugely taxing and resource intensive, you've got to understand what's in it for you. What's the point, right? Why am I doing this? It can't just be, well, I think this is important for me as a leader, but why? It's the why that, and this is what Simon Sinek does so brilliantly. Why, right? But those skills become hugely, hugely important. Every sector, every organizations I have worked in, those are the three areas that I see being really important.
Yeah. There are lots of questions coming up, and we have 10 minutes. So I'll try and take a couple of questions here, if you're okay.
Yes.
There's a question from Anurag, who says that while there's so much focus on DEI, especially from having more women in leadership, what explains the huge gap in leadership roles in Fortune 500 organizations of women leaders?
Anurag, yeah, I think so. The thing is, focusing on women in organizations, you've got a number of points in the pipeline where there are very high attrition rates. Even if you have at graduate entry level 50-50 entry, which a lot of companies have worked towards, it's recognizing there are key points along the pipeline where we lose women. So we know that there's a stretch at the point middle management, and then the pyramid gets even smaller as you move to the top. Now, the thing is, when you talk about focus, the question actually is it the right type of focus? So we've seen a lot of events, we've seen a lot of activities, a lot of initiatives that look good, they sound good, but the question has to be, what impact are they having? And I think we're seeing a bit of maturity in the D&I space now, where we're seeing a questioning about, okay, what's actually working? Over the last 10 years or so, there's just been a lot of activity, a lot of events thrown in the D&I space in many organizations, but you have to ask the question, okay, really, what's the impact? What's sticking here? The things that really work for women are not going to be the fun, glossy things that are out there that make good social media posts. For my research, one of the biggest things that makes a difference is actually championing. So a lot of organizations will say we have mentoring programs for women. The thing is, mentoring is not going to get women into leadership roles. And it's a very cost-effective way of doing something without really achieving powerful results. And I'm sorry, I'm being very, very blunt here, because I see it a lot, and then organizations don't understand what's happening. But championing is a more nuanced form of sponsorship, but it's when you have senior leaders who take the time and the effort to actually get to know the talented women further down the pipeline and start spotting opportunities for them, providing stretch roles for them. This all helps address things like imposter syndrome. But they're the ones who can advocate and promote for those women into leadership roles. Mentoring doesn't do it. Coaching is hugely important in terms of skills development, in terms of helping them work through their development, their learning, building that platform. And that plus championing can be very, very powerful. But mentoring, it doesn't require a lot of resource, but it doesn't achieve the results. And one-to-one, this is really where you see the impact. So for me, that still remains. I've seen it over the last 10 years. I've written a book about it. My second book was completely about this. So with that, I think to me, championing is probably the most important thing that really does make a difference. And Rajesh, it comes back to even the point we talked about earlier in terms of platforms. But I think, it's not a silver bullet. That's my other point. There are a lot of things you need to work on in this space.
Yeah, there's an interesting one about innovation and solutions, and basically it says, in a world, this is from Ritu Srivastava, in a world where digital transformation is accelerating, how can organizations ensure that diversity of thought is included in designing new innovative digital solutions?
Okay, very, very quick answer. This is a lot of the training programs that I've been running. If you help leaders understand the importance of cognitive diversity, if you help leaders understand the immense importance of collective intelligence, it becomes a no-brainer. That's my simple answer, because we can really expand it, but we don't have time. But for leaders to understand the value behind cognitive diversity and how it builds better quality thinking, and I talk a lot about collective intelligence with them, that's when they start to recognize what's missing in the room and where they need to pull that in. And then you go through the mechanisms to help them do that.
Yeah. There's one more question from Harsh. It says, as does AI address processes of intelligence augmentation, the word that you used, as well as negatives like intelligence subversion and attention dispersion? This is, I wish they put it up on the screen there. Does AI address processes of intelligence augmentation, positive aspect, as well as negatives like intelligence subversion and attention dispersion? Is this being observable? I think it's up on the screen.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna first of all, I'm not an expert on AI. In fact, the Future Proof book we wrote, we included the whole section in there on emerging tech for non-tech specialists, because I think you have to understand, at least you have to understand enough of it to understand how it's going to impact your job. So Harsh, I'm not sure I can understand the details that I'm not sure I can answer the details you're asking here. But I mean, what I am seeing in a really positive way, I think the diversity conversations that have been happening over the last 15 years, the emergence, the huge acceleration of emerging tech, and if we look at AI, if we look at generative AI, I think the spotlights when things have gone wrong have been so immense that I think there is certainly a need, and not a need, but actually benefits of the programming, the coding, the thinking behind AI to be even better. But the real challenge as well is everybody needs to step up to the table. You can't just leave it to one group to be the leads on it and then say, well, this isn't working for us. And this is something I do talk about in Future Proof Your Career. And again, we talk about it even in the last book, Take the Lead. If let's just say we're talking about women, if women are not stepping up and engaging with AI consistently, or with emerging tech consistently, their voice is not heard, and then you can't complain. So actually being part of that conversation, being part of the development is hugely important.
Thank you. We just have a couple of minutes. Shaheen, I'll just probably ask you one question related to the three leadership traits that you speak about, which is vision, curiosity, and empathy. And with respect to curiosity and coaching, since we have a lot of coaches in the audience, how do you see the role of curiosity and a larger level uh, coaching in the emerging future?
Oh, I think it's brilliant. I mean, I'm loving what I'm seeing in the space around the role of coaching coming in. I'm, everything we've talked about in terms of curiosity, innovation, empathy, these traits, they are nurtured through coaching behavior. They're nurtured through building a mindset of coaching, building that mindset. I mean, the trust piece, this is this is your field so well. Bringing those elements into leadership behavior is absolutely critical. We're seeing some really interesting examples. You have to look, you just have to look at an organization like Standard Chartered. They have rolled out coaching programs for their middle managers. It was so successful. They actually the demand for it was so high they had to continue the program. And I think that's really powerful, because it's not just one division in one part of the world, it's global. It is something that I find working with engineering firms, working with in the oil and gas sector, technology, finance, you start talking about coaching behaviors and how that can underpin these things, the leadership traits we've talked about. People are sharing it. People are really excited and interested, and they're curious about it. I'm literally going to leave you and go and do a session on active listening with a very big consulting firm here. And I've had engineers in their mid-40s coming back to me and saying, I am trying active listening with my team. I'm trying to let them come up with solutions. So I think what coaching allows is for leaders to try to step by step try a different way of working and experimentation without feeling like they've got to try a completely new model of leadership. So I think what the coaching specialism brings into the space, and what you do as coaches is phenomenal, because it's taking leaders in that space, walking them hand by hand to actually to get out of their comfort zone and try something new. And I think it's very exciting.
Thank you so much. And David, of course, we can't do justice. There's so many other questions and lovely comments about people saying brilliant session. Shaheena and Rajesh loved it. Very exciting session. Lots of positive feedback in the comment section. Thank you so much, Shaheen, for spending this time with us and taking us through your journey. And what's the most exciting thing for you right now, as a woman leader, as an entrepreneur, as an author? What excites you the most today? That was my last question.
I think the prospect of having freedom and opportunities to try new things and experiment. And I think really living by what I say. So, experimenting with new things and being much more comfortable with trying things and really being okay if they don't quite work out the way I wanted them to. That's absolutely fine. Embracing what happens when things don't work out the way I expected. So, lots of new projects and opportunities emerging, and watch this space, I guess.
Thank you so much. And this is probably the time to close the session. We have actually exceeded 2 minutes more, but thanks again. And thank you for the audience for all the engagement.
Thank you all, and please, great conversations. If you'd like to keep conversations going, connect with me on LinkedIn, and more than happy to pick up the conversations with you. But thank you for the questions, Rajesh. Thank you. It's been such a delight talking to you today.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.